All right, I will say good morning. Let us begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's shir, Yoel and Sarah Kelman, to our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Cheshvan, for dedicating all of the shiurim and drashos this month. In honor of all the shiurim and drashos that come from the Kehillah, we also dedicate our learning in the Schus of Refuah Shlema for Aviva Bas Shena Chana, as well as for Rachel Yehudis Bas Tova Gittel. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, these two women together with Kol Chol Yisrael have a complete and enduring refuah. Both today's daf is Pei Hey 85. A lot to do today, so we are picking up at the bottom of Pei Daled Amud Beis, the bottom of 84b. So it says the Gemara Salzabos. So remember, just to reorient ourselves a bit, we were focusing in yesterday's daf on the machlokis between Rav and Shmuel regarding regarding who has rights to a common area? Who has rights to a common area, right? We'll just keep it simple. Two chatzeros share a common area. Who ultimately, again, has the rights to that area? So the simple answer is rights are defined by ease of use. The machlokes then comes up is how do you define ease of use? So let's go with what everybody agrees with. What everybody agrees with is that halacha l'maisa, if you have, let's say, one chatzer accessing the we'll call it the common area through what's called Pesach. Pesach meaning we'll call it. I think the term we used yesterday was lateral usage, direct usage. So if you go ahead and you utilize it through Pesach, then halacha l'maisa, let's say one chatzer uses it through Pesach, another chatzer uses it through more complicated usage, which again we talk about either shilshul or zrika, lowering down or throwing. So obviously the one who goes ahead and utilizes it through Pesach, through lateral usage, is going to be the chatzar which is entitled to it. The machlokis comes up between Rav and Shmuel is what happens when one is through zrika, one is through shilshul. One is through throwing, one is through lowering. So Rav said zrika and shilshul are the same thing. They're both neither is considered to have ease of access, and therefore they aser each other. Shmuel says no. Shilshul is considered to be ease of use over zrika. And again, bepashtos, his logic is because of gravity. Because of gravity. Goes. It says the Gemara. Rav Yehuda Shmuel. So Rav Yehuda is the name of Shmuel as follows. Both at the top of Pehei. Bor shebein shtei chatzeros, mufleges mikosel ze'arba umikosel ze'arba. Let's say a very interesting case. If you have a pit, a bar, now both say this actually over here is specifically talking about a water cistern. So you can see this is picture 287. Picture 287 on your sheet, in the booklets. I don't know if she sent out the link to this. Okay, good, wonderful, thank you. So the Gemara says, so you have a water cistern, a water pit, in between two chatzeros. Now the details of this case are going to be exceptionally important over here. So listen to this. Mufleges mikosa za'arba, the water cistern, the water pit, is 4 tfachim, right? 4 tfachim from each of the homes. So before we go on, look at Rashi just a moment. Tap Rashi, Borshe ben shtei chatzeros, haperudos zumizu. So here's what you're talking about. Imagine this. Well, you don't have to imagine. You can see the picture. 2 homes. In between the 2 homes is a water cistern. Now there's that area where the water cistern is situated. We'll call it a mavah. We'll call it an alleyway, but no one lives there. No one lives there. And neither of the homes have the ability to access that area through a doorway. The only thing they both have is they both have windows which open up into that alleyway, which goes ahead and contains the water cistern, the water pit, the bar. So we'll say, so again, no one lives in that area and no one has direct access through a doorway into that area. So Rashi continues, he says, Umafsik b'nei kein mavoi katan ve'ein durim psuchen lo. Neither of the homes open up into that alleyway. V'abar ba'oseh have sik mufleges mikosa za'arba. And I will say the bar, the pit itself, is at least 4 tfachim away from each of the homes. The lav hachi, the muflag havi tashmisha benachas, v'havi kimosha bar chatzia bechatzia zeh v'chatzia bechatzia. I will say, now the reason the Gemara is setting this up, that the bar itself is at least 4 tfachim away from each home, is why? Because I will say, if the bar was in 4 tfachim of each home, then each home would consider to possess ease of access. And if each home would have ease of access, then what? The homes would effectively aser upon each other. So now the bar itself is more than 4 tfachim or more ultimately again away from each home. So continuing Rashi, he goes on, V'havik Moshe bar chatzeh b'chatzah zu, v'chatzeh b'chatzah zu, shereshush shneim sholat esbanu. Tanam maslisin bar sheben shtei chatzeros, in mal in b'shabbos, shezeh osra zeh, ad she'evar sheyasa mechitza tli b'bar. Fine. So we'll say, so again, so here's the case. So I have a shared cistern, and an alleyway in between two homes. No one lives in the alleyway. No one has direct access through a doorway to the alleyway. The bar itself is at least 4 tefachim away from each of the homes. Because of that, neither has ease of access. Because neither has ease of access, or ease of use, I should say, therefore what? Effectively, they don't asser each other. So how do you draw water from that bar on Shabbos? So watch this. Back to the Gemara. Zeh motzi ziz kol shum amalei. So we'll say, what does each home do? And you can see this in the picture in 287. Each of them goes ahead and extends a ziz. And we'll say ziz literally means a protrusion. A protrusion. They each go ahead and extend a board from their windows, and those boards allow them to go ahead and draw water. What's the pshat? Take a look at Rashi. Zeh motzi ziz kol. Rashi says, mikaslo ad labar. So ultimately, each of them goes ahead and extends a piece of wood from the wall up until the bar, umamali derech halono, and then they could fill up a bucket with water through the window. D'chein zeh, d'chevon the muflages dali lo shalti be leser zal zeh, umishum she reshus l'shnei b'mavoy nami leka she'in diurin pesuchim l'chatzer l'atzeis v'lavo b'regel ve'ein tashmishasan bekach ela derech avir. Oh. So I'll say, look at what's happening over here. What the Gemara is introducing about say over here is a case where people use a common area, but only through airspace. Only through airspace. No one is using the ground of this shared area. They're only using the airspace. Now the truth is, I both say, what's the shot with this board, right? This protruding board. In reality, you don't really need that either. So you both say the whole chap over here is each chatzar is utilizing avir, is utilizing airspace. And as we're going to see, the theme over here is that utilizing the same airspace does not asser each other. So why the need for the board? Ela mishum heker ba'alma. Both say the board is simply there as a reminder. Shelo yishtamish birshus acheres shel shnayim below eruv. So we'll say, listen to this. The point of the little boards, the point of the protrusions, Rabbi say, is we don't want you to confuse this with another case. In other words, Rabbi say, remember, this case works, as we're going to see the dynamics in just a moment. This case works because, remember, there's a whole bunch of caveats. They're opening up into a shared mavoi. The cistern itself is more than 4 tefachim from each home. Therefore, neither has ease of access or ease of usage. There's no doorway that opens up into the mavoi. Ultimately, again, they're only using airspace. So technically speaking, they don't asr upon each other, and each one could go ahead and draw water from the window. But because it looks like a shared common space, we make them do some type of tikkun, something. We make them do something so that people won't come to think that in other cases of shared space, you could also just go ahead and utilize without any kind of eruv or any kind of anything else. So okay, so we don't have to do the rest. But again, this is similar to the idea of drawing water from a boat on Shabbos. That technically speaking, if the boat's on the ocean, you could draw water without doing anything. But Chazal mandated some type of tikkun, some type of symbolic mechitza, in order that you not confuse this with other situations. Fine. So back to the Gemara. So Rabbi Yehuda himself said, afilu kanya. So what Rabbi Yehuda said, the truth is, ziz, Abose means like a more substantive board. Rabbi Yehuda said the truth is, even a reed, right? In other words, even like a very thin stick would be enough. So Rabbi Yehuda agrees that halacha l'maaseh, you require some type of tikkun. You definitely require some type of reminder. But halacha l'maaseh need not even be as substantive as it is. Amli Abai Rabbi Yosef. So Abai said to Rabbi Yosef, let me ask you, Had Rabbi Yehuda d'Shmuel he? So we'll say Rabbi Yehuda's position must reflect the position of Shmuel. So we'll say, interesting enough, what we're going to see is Rabbi Yehuda learned under two Rebbeim, Rav and Shmuel. Okay, imagine that schus learned under two Rebbeim like Rav and Shmuel. So we'll say, so the Gemara suggests Rabbi Yehuda must have gleaned this position ever from Shmuel. Why? Di'i Rav, because we'll say if it was Rav, Di Rav Ha'amar in Adam Oster al Chavero Derech Avir. Because Rav says we're going to see Rav's position is shared airspace does not aser. That Rav say if two people share the same airspace, one does not aser upon the other, and if one does not aser upon the other, in reality, no tikkun, right? You shouldn't have to do anything. You don't need a ziz. You don't need a kind. You don't need anything. Rav say take a look at Rashi. Di Rav. Rashi says Dahavit Nami Rabbe, because remember as I just mentioned before, Rav was also Rav Yehuda's Rebbe. Lo Gamarla Dahain Adam Oser Achavera B'Tashmish Muflag Kazeh. Shetzarech Lizlog Dali Ba'avir Dalatfachim Ba'afilu Kanyulot Tzarech. So it's like Rav says like this: the only time that shared usage goes ahead and asers one party upon the other is when it's a more normative form of usage. But this notion of like, remember I will say, how do they use this water cistern? You literally have to take a bucket out of your window. You have to throw it out the window into the water cistern. The water cistern is not right out of the window. But remember again, this is not halacha lamaisa like you're lowering it right out of your window, right? You got to throw it and then you have to lower it. So Rav says this type of usage, which is a usage of avir, shared airspace, this doesn't aser. And according to Rav, it would appear that you could both homes could use the same water cistern without making any kind of tikkun, right? Without a board or a reader or anything like that. So the Gemara says, so we'll say, so where does Shmuel gain his? Where does Shmuel get this idea from? That halacha l'maisa with shared airspace that you have to do some type of tikkun. So we'll say, if you want to say that it's from the case of Rav Nachman who said in the Mishul, which also was yesterday's daf, Gag hasomoch l'rishus harabim tzarich sulam kavua lahatiro. That I will say, if you have a rooftop, this is what we ended with yesterday's daf. If you have a rooftop that is in close proximity to the rishus harabim, in order, I both say, remember the image over here. This was picture 286. Right, so you had a rooftop. You have a rooftop that was essentially used by three different areas: Amir Pesas, an Aliyah, an upper story, and the Rishus Harabim. So Rav Nachman said, so Rav Nachman said in Shmuel that if you have this rooftop next to Rishus Harabim, in order for the Amir Pesas to use it, tzarech sulam kavua lahatiro. You need a fixed ladder leading up to the Aliyah in order to go ahead and allow the Merpasas to use this rooftop. So I will say, so maybe that's so what Gemara suggesting is maybe the issue over here is one of shared airspace. And it's the fixed ladder which essentially serves as the tikkun, serves as the reminder that this is in fact shared airspace and belongs to the Aliyah and the Merpasas as well. So we'll say, so maybe that's the raya, to which the Gemara says, well, maybe not Dilma ki Rav Papa. We'll say, maybe that case is interpreted like Rav Papa. Remember Rav Papa yesterday's daf? So we'll say, what's the case? The case is where the Bnei Rishus Harabim, Mamish, utilized that gag for what? They utilize it to put down their hats and their packages and their scarves. So there's an active usage from the Bnei Rishus Harabim, not just an airspace usage. Okay, Elameha. So we'll say rather it must be from here. So we'll say, so just to be clear, what we're trying to figure out over here, what we have over here in this case is Rav Yehuda saying that halacha l'maisa, shared airspace on a technical level is fine on Shabbos. So you have two chatzeros, or in this case, two homes that share the same airspace. They do not aser one upon the other, except you need some type of reminder. Since Rabbi said this is a situation of shared space, we're concerned that if we don't make you do some type of tikkun to this area, you're going to inadvertently draw erroneous conclusions for other cases of shared space, and come to allow shared space when it really might be usher. So what do you need? So the first opinion you said a ziz, a board, and Rabbi Yehuda said no, all you need is even like a very small stick, just something. We're just trying to figure out where Rabbi Yehuda gets this from. Rabbi Yehuda has two Rabbeim, Rav and Shmuel. The Gemara says it can't be from Rav, because Rav holds that shared airspace is not a problem at all. So rather, it must be Shmuel. So we're just trying to figure out where Shmuel gets this from. Ela meha. So I'll say rather, again, it must be that Shmuel gleans this idea, and by extension, Rabbi Yehuda gleans this from the case we just mentioned. Zeh motzi ziz kol shehu umemale, v'zeh motzi ziz kol shehu umemale. So the Gemara says, Taima, so each party in this case of the shared airspace of the cistern, each one has to go ahead and put the ziz out, right? This board out. So the Gemara says, Taima da'apik halo apik. So we'll say the reason that each home is permitted to draw water from this shared water cistern is because they each extend the board, the ziz. So the Gemara says halo apik, but if they were not extend the board, amrinon adam osir al chavero derech avir. Ultimately, again, without the board, obviously you would say that people do restrict each other through airspace. So we'll say, so again, the Gemara is very simply, the fact that Shmuel says that you have to put out a ziz, that you have to put out the board in order to go ahead and draw water from the common water cistern indicates to us that halacha l'maisa, without the board, you would not be permitted to go in and draw water. Why not? Because obviously Shmuel is holding that halacha l'maisa, shared airspace, does restrict one another. Okay, so the Gemara says, Udirav mehecha. So we'll say, so fine. So now we understand where Shmuel, so Shmuel Shita will say, is mamish derived from this case. The fact, so Shmuel says the fact that in order to go ahead and draw water, you're going to need a ziz, indicates to us that without the ziz, you can't draw water, which tells us that shared airspace does restrict. Fine. Where does Rav learn that shared airspace does not restrict? Udirav mehecha. Where does Rav learn that from? Ilema meha. Shtei gusteros zulam alamizu asa mechitza le'al yonu avlo asa mechitza le'tatona. Suppose maybe you learn from the following case. Two gusteros. Suppose that this is similar to the case we had in yesterday's daf as well, right? You have the two terraces, two gusteros, zu lamala mizu, one above the other, one above the other. Asu mechitza le'al yona. So we'll say if they went ahead and they made a mechitza, so they made a partition for the upper gustera. But did not make a mechitza for the lower one. What's the halacha? Shtehen asuros ad shia ervu. Both gusteros are asur until they go ahead and halacha lamaisa make a joint erev. Amrav huna amrav lo shana ela besmucha. That's only true when the two gusteros are next to each other. Aval b'mefleges arba'a. But if they are more than 4 tefachim apart from each other, al yona muteres v'tachtona asura, then the upper one, which made a mechitza, will ultimately again be suitable for carrying, and the other one, the lower one, will not. To which we'll say, see from here again that halacha l'maisa would appear that what asers then when they're within 4 tefachim, when they are within 4 tefachim of each other, it is the shared airspace that ultimately asers them. To which the Gemara says, well, maybe not. Dilma shiny hacha dechayvan de lazeb izrika v'shilshul ulazeb b'shilshul l'chudei kilazeb izrika lazeb b'pesach tamis. So also listen to this. So remember again, this is going back to yesterday's daf. So we'll say, so maybe the Gemara says like this. Maybe, I'm sorry. I just lost the place. I'm sorry, let me go back. Amrav Loshana Ela B'smucha. So we'll say Rav said this is only true if the two gusteros are next to each other. Look at Rashi just a moment. Ela B'smucha. She'ein al yona meshucha mikeneket hatachton v'meshach hakosal dalat tfachim. That the upper gustera is not more than 4 tfachim away from the lower gustera. V'afa gav de gava mimena asara. Rav l'tamei da amar lezel b'shosh lezel b'zrika. Supposed to listen to this. So the Gemara says, let's go back to the Gemara for just a moment. The Gemara suggests maybe this case of the gusteros, this is not a good raya for avir, for airspace. Why not, Rabosai? Because in this case over here, this case is different. Why? Tilma shiny hacha kevan de lezeb b'zrika b'shulshul. Because Rabosai, remember again, listen to this. When the lower gustera, remember again, Rabosai, go back to yesterday's case where everybody is accessing the water below through the hole and the mechitza in the upper gustera. When the lower gustera goes ahead and throws its bucket into the mechitza of the upper gustera, Bosai, the lower gustera only accesses the water how? Through zrika and shilshul. Zrika and shilshul, right? It has to throw the bucket and then has to lower the bucket. So the Gemara says, ulazeh b'shilshul l'chudei. Whereas the upper gustera only has to go out and use shilshul, right? Only has to do lowering. So the Gemara says, therefore the Gemara says, "T'cheivan de lazeh b'zrika b'shilshul, lazeh b'shilshul l'chudei, ki lazeh b'zrika ulazeh b'pesach tam." So I'll say any time that you have one rishos accessing through zrika and shilshul, and another rishos accessing just through shilshul, that's like the one through shilshul has the ability to access it through Pesach. So I don't know if that makes sense. Let me say that once more. So we'll say, so again, going back to Rav and Shmuel for just a moment. When one chatzar can only access the water through zrika and shulshul, right? Throwing up and lowering down. And the second gustera, in this case the upper gustera, only requires shulshul in order to access. The one that only has to utilize shulshul in order to access is like Pesach. It's like that chutzner, or in this case, that gustera, has lateral direct access, and therefore ultimately, again, is mutter. Okay, so the Gemara says, Elamiha. So we'll say it's not a rise. So remember, we're going to keep focused over here. We're just trying to figure out, where does Rav know that Avir restricts? That's all we want to know. Where does Rav learn that halacha l'maaseh? I'm sorry. Where does Rav learn that in adam oser al chavero derech avir, that shared airspace does not restrict? So the Gemara says, rather, the Gemara says, Elameha, Dam Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Bar Avu, Amar Rav, Shnei Batim v'shalosh chorvos bereim. Suppose this is an interesting case. If you have a home and 3 ruins in between the homes. So we'll say, so this is picture 288. Picture 288. So the details over here again are also quite significant. So we'll say, so if you see the picture, you have 2 homes. In between the 2 homes are 3 ruins. Then I both say, there is no doorway from the home to the ruins, but rather, again, the way the home accesses the ruins are through windows. So there are windows that open from the homes into the ruins. So says the Gemara, now I will say, watch this. So Shnei Batim v'shalosh chorvos benehem zeh mishtamesh b'samuch shelo al yedei zrika. So we'll call it house A, could go ahead and access the ruin next to it through zrika, or as we'll say, through the window. V'zeh mishtamesh b'samuch shelo al yedei zrika, and house B could access the ruin next to it through zrika. Amud Beis v'ha'emtzoi aser. But I will say, but the middle ruin will be aser. I'll be aser. Okay. So the Gemara says, Yosef Rav Barona v'kamer lahashmaisa. So Rav Barona sat and he said over this particular ruling. So the Gemara says, v'kamer lahashmaisa. Amalei Rabbi Eliezer bar Bei Rav. Amar Rav hachi. So we'll say, he said to Rabbi Eliezer bar Bei Rav, did Rav really say this? So we'll say, so remember again, so just to be clear, what is Rav saying? You have 2 homes. In between the 2 homes are 3 ruins. 3 ruins. So each home opens directly into 1 ruin, and there is a 3rd ruin in the middle. So house A has the right to throw stuff into the ruin that's next to it. House B has the ability to throw stuff into the ruin that's next to it. But the middle ruin, which is not directly accessible by either of the chatzeros, ultimately what? Ultimately is aser. So comes along, so what happened? Rav Barona is sitting over, Rav Barona is sitting over saying over this ruling, and Rabbi Eliezer says to him, excuse me, Rav Barona is saying it over, and Rabbi Eliezer bar Bei Rav said, he asked, did Rav really say this? Amar le'in, he said, yes, Rav did say this. Achvili ushpizos, he said to him, show me where Rav lives. Achvile, so we'll say, he showed him where Rav lived. Asala kamed Rav, so he came before Rav. Amar le'e, Amar marhach, he said, Rav, did you really say this? That in this case over here, the ruin next to each home is permitted, but the ruin in the middle ultimately is going to be asur. Amar le'in. Rav said, yes, I did say this. Amar le'va ha'marhu da'amar lezeb b'shulshul u'lezeb b'zrika shnei masurin. But Rav, you said that halacha l'maisa, when one area acts, if you have 2 adjoining areas and they both share a common 3rd area, when one area accesses the common area through zrika and one through shulshul, they're both asur. They're both also. I'll say, look at Rashi. V'ha'marhu da'amar. You see that Rashi? V'ha'marhu da'amar. Alma afagav d'shilshul noach mizrika hoil de'eno mamish la'echalem kepesach lo sharina le'lecha menayu v'hachinami me'acher de'eno kepesach lo lezeh v'lo lezeh afagav d'nachos lezeh mizeh. Listen, supposed to listen to this. So what's happening over here is as follows. So Rabbi Eliezer was very surprised that Rav said this. And that's what he says to Rav Barona. I'd like to ask Rav in person if he said this. Well, why was Rabbi Eliezer very surprised? But say, let's go back for just a moment. Remember again, the way we got into this whole sugya is Rav said it's possible. So imagine the following scenario. You have Chatzer A, Chatzer B, and there's an area in between the 2 Chatzeros. Chatzer A accesses the area through Zrika. Chatzer B accesses the area through Shilshul. What's the halacha according to Rav? What's the halacha? The area is asr to both of them. Neither are considered to have ease of use, ease of access, and therefore they are both asr in the area. So what Rabbi Eliezer was surprised at was like this. In this case, where I have 2 homes, right, that open up into 3 ruins. So home A opens up into a ruin. And when we say open up, we'll say, what is open? I should clarify this. Open up means what? There's no entranceway. There's no doorway. What is there? What is there? There's a window. So home A has a window into, we'll call it ruin A. And home B has a window into ruin B. And ruin C sits there in the middle. So Rav said, remember, what did Rav Paskin? Rav said, well, ruin A is permitted to home A, ruin B is permitted to home B, and ruin C is usher to everyone. And Rav says, I don't understand. Rav, you said any time that pretty much neither party has ease of use or ease of access into a shared area, Salach Lamai said asers. So in this case over here, neither home really has ease of use or ease of access into either of the ruins. Why not, Rabosai? Because how are they both accessing the ruins? How? Through windows, not through doorways. If that's the case, everything, all 3 ruins should be usher to all 3 parties. To which the Gemara says, Amalei, so Rav said, Nisavris the kaimi kishura? No. You think the case is, I will say, like picture, a lot going on, I'm sorry. You think the case is like picture 288, right? That's what you think the case is like, right? Where ultimately, again, the 3 ruins are aligned in a line. But that's not the case. The kaimi kichatsuba. Rather, again, I will say, ultimately, again, the 3 homes are actually arranged. I will say, chatsuba literally means like a tripod. What does that mean? In fact, again, I don't know, I'm assuming all of the Gemaras, you should have a picture of it right in the Gemara itself. You could see, again, it happens to be, it's picture 289. So you can see, I will say, instead what it is it's not 3, it's not 3 chatzeros in a row, but rather, in fact, what it is not 3 ruins in a row, but rather 2 ruins on the bottom, quote unquote, and 1 ruin on top. So that, Rav says, that's the case. And you can see the picture, there should be a picture right there in the Gemara as well. So we'll say, look at Rashi, what does this mean? Lo da'avidi kechatzubin, ushloshton smuchin lebatim. So we'll say, in fact, interestingly enough, all 3 of these ruins, therefore, are all next to the homes. See, I will say, we thought in the original case, 2 of the ruins are next to each of the homes, right? And the 3rd ruin is isolated from both. In fact, Rav says that's not the case. The 3 ruins, where you have 1 larger ruin on top, 2 smaller ruins on the bottom, sandwiched in between 2 homes. So we'll say, now watch this. Look at Rashi. Lo davidi kechatzuva, it's made like a tripod. Shloshtan smuchen lebatim. So all 3 of the ruins are next to both of the homes. Sahem tzoi kineged ashtayim kishlosha ragli akankan. So ultimately, again, the middle one. Now they're calling the middle one literally the top one. Right, the top one, which spans the entire area in between the 2 homes. Hilcha chasmuchin mutarin de'ein adam oser al chavero derech avir. V'ha'emtzoi aser d'shnei mishtamshin ba b'sholshul ureshus shnehem hi. So we'll say, listen to this. So Rav will say the 2 smaller ruins are both going to be permitted to each of their respective homes. Why? Because Rav says, we'll say, how are each of the homes utilizing the ruins? Very important. How are each of them utilizing the ruins? How? Through avir, through airspace. Why through airspace? Why through airspace? Because there's no door that opens up into those ruins. The only way they're utilizing the ruins ultimately are through windows. So therefore, again, because each of them are using it through airspace, so ultimately, and they do not restrict upon each other. So the 2 smaller ruins, right, we'll call it on the bottom, right, the 2 smaller ruins on the bottom of the tripod, ultimately, again, that in those 2 ruins are perfectly permitted. Why? Because you can't aser joint. Airspace doesn't aser one upon the other. Therefore, we'll say, but however, and we'll call it the top, or I guess it depends on your orientation, top or bottom, right? But the larger ruin, which spans ultimately, again, the area between both homes, so in Rav's view, that's the equivalent of echad b'shulshul ve'echad b'zrika, or shneim b'shulshul, shneim b'zrika, and therefore I will say that area will be aser. That area will be aser. So therefore I will say halacha l'maisa. You begin to see that what here now you see that Rav holds avir doesn't aser. So both say so. Just an interesting machlokes Rav and Shmuel. So Rav holds, as we said in Amud Aleph, ein adam oser al chavero derech avir, that ultimately again a person does not go ahead and restrict. There's no such thing as restricting upon someone else through common usage of airspace. And Shmuel seems to indicate that it can be problematic. Now, both say, now the truth is, even according to Shmuel, it's not terribly problematic, but it just requires some type of tikkun. Whereas according to Rav, you might not require a tikkun at all. So the Gemara goes weiter. Amali Rav Papa Rava. Lema Shmuel less late Rav Dimi. So we'll say it must be that Shmuel doesn't hold over the position of Rav Dimi. So we'll say, remember again, Shmuel holds, as Rashi points out over here, Da'amar Adam Osra Chaver Derech Avir. So we'll say, fundamental yesodistic machlokes between Rav and Shmuel. Can you restrict someone else's usage of a common area if you're both using it only through airspace? So we'll say, so now we've seen two different examples of this. The latest example were the homes that have ruins in between them. Two ruins in between two homes. Each home only has a window that opens up into the ruins. They're only using the ruins derech avir. Rav would say the homes do not restrict upon each other. The only time they restrict is when there's a shared ruin in between them. But if there are two independent ruins in between them, each one could use their own ruin. We also saw it where that according to Rav Abosai Halacha L'Maisa, in the case where we started today's daf, in the case of the water cistern that sits in between the two homes, neither has a doorway that opens up into that mavui. The cistern itself is more than 4 tefachim away from each home, so each home is only utilizing the cistern derech avir. Rav says no problem; they could both draw water on Shabbos. Shmuel, on the other hand, says that no, common or usage of common airspace in a shared area does restrict one upon the other. So must say that Shmuel doesn't hold over Rav Dimi. Okay, what did Rav Dimi say? Dichi as Rav Dimi am Rabbi Yochanan makom she'in bo dalid al dalid mutar libnei rosh hashanah lekasef alav. So let's listen to this. Because what did Rav Dimi say? Rav Dimi said, if you have a pillar that is 10 tefachim high, but it is less than dalid al dalid. So I'll say, remember again, we know this from our Masechah Shabbos days. A pillar that's 10 tefachim high and dalid al dalid that sits in the Rosh Hashanah is what? It's Rosh Hashanah. But if you have an area that is 10 tefachim high, but not dalid al dalid, it is not the Rosh Hashanah. And therefore, Rav Dimi says that what? The members of the Rosh Hashanah could adjust their load on it. So we'll say both the members of it. So imagine you have this pillar, and it stands literally in between, right? In between Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Hashanah. Both the members of the Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Hashanah could both utilize the pillar to adjust their loads, with one caveat: ubilvad shelo yachlifu. With one exception, I will say that they not exploit the use of the area to transfer items from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. So we'll say, so remember again, technically speaking, if you were to do that, I will say, right, technically it works. If you were to take an item from the Rosh Hashanah, put it on the pillar, someone else from Rosh Hashanah can then come along and what? Take it off the pillar and begin into Rosh Hashanah. And technically speaking, you have not done anything wrong. Because I will say, that area of 10 tefachim high and less than 4 tefachim in area is really like a makom patur. It's really an exempted area. So technically speaking, it could be your way of transferring items from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. So therefore the Gemara says, Rav Dimi says, that halacha l'maisa, you could use it. Both the Bnei Rosh Hashanah and the Bnei Rosh Hashanah could use that area to adjust their loads, but halacha l'maisa, you can't exploit it. So we'll say, but what do you see over here? What's that case? So the Gemara will say, that's shared airspace. Right? So really what's happening over there, that shared airspace, both the Bnei Rosh Hashanah and the Bnei Rosh Hashanah are using the area above the pillar for their own use. So what do you see from here? You see from here that shared airspace does not restrict one Rosh Hashanah upon the other. So obviously the Gemara suggests over here that Shmuel would not hold of this, because Shmuel holds that shared airspace does restrict one upon the other. To which the Gemara says, now here's the difference. Hasam Rishuyos Daraisa, Hacha Rishuyos Dirabana. Both say this is incredible. We've seen this statement before. It's different. In the case of the pillar straddling a Rosh Hashanah, you're dealing with biblical Rishuyos. Here in these cases of shared airspace, we're dealing with rabbinic domains. The Chachamim asu chizuk l'divrei yoser mishal Torah. And the rabbis felt compelled to be more machmir with rabbinic law than with biblical law. Which also, we've seen this before, even though at first glance when you read it, it sounds totally counterintuitive, because generally we're more machmir with biblical law than rabbinic law. That's true in case of doubt. What the Gemara is highlighting over here is when it comes to Rishuyos, Chazal felt people have respect for biblical domains. So if you tell people, listen, You could both use the same pillar to adjust your loads, but you can't exploit it to go ahead and transfer items between one domain and another. People will listen to that because people know that transferring an item from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah is an Isser Da'araisa. So they won't come to exploit the pillar. But in Rosh Hashanah, which again people are generally more makel with, if you go ahead and you start making kulas, people will totally exploit it. Therefore, Shmuel felt that it's only the common usage of airspace in rabbinic domains that is problematic. But interestingly enough, the common use of airspace in the biblical domains is not problematic. Quite fascinating. Did Rav really say this? Did Rav really say this? Now listen to this. Rashi says, Rav Hachi, so we'll say, is that true that Rav held that common use of airspace does not restrict one upon the other? But we learned, but it's an interesting case. Let's say I own two homes on both sides of the Shurabim. So let's say, imagine again, there's a street that's Rosh Hashanah. I own homes on either side, across the width of the Rosh Hashanah. So I own homes across the street from each other, but the street which runs in between the homes is a Rosh Hashanah. So now watch this. Shnei batim mishnei tzidei Rosh Hashanah. We'll look at Rashi. Shnei batim shel adam echad. Now the two homes belong to one person. Also, Lizrak v'afagav dechisagi ba'avir Rosh Hashanah l'mal me'asara kasagi v'kamar da'oser alav aviron shel b'nei Rosh Hashanah afal pi she'en kamtam. Let me read the Gemara. Shnei batim mishnei tzidei Rosh Hashanah. So what says in this? You have two homes on two sides of Rosh Hashanah. Rabba bar Rav Huna Amar Rav Asr Lizrok Mizeh Lazeh. So we'll say Rav Huna said the name. So Rabba bar Rav Huna said the name of Rav. One home cannot throw to another home. Ushmuel Amar Mutter Lizrok Mizeh Lazeh. And ultimately again, Shmuel said one home can throw from one to the other. Now we'll say, now here's what's interesting. So we'll say, technically speaking, remember the avir of Rosh Hashanah goes how high? How high? Only 10 tfachim. So we'll say 10 tfachim was not all that high. So think about this in just a moment. If I'm standing in one home, Reuven's standing in another home, I could easily throw an object above 10 tfachim, right? It goes through permitted airspace and lands on the other home. That's actually not the problem. Yet Rav said, I can't do it. Now, interestingly enough, the Gemara is suggesting over here, the Gemara is inferring that the reason that I can't do it is because somehow, as Rashi points out, aviron shel b'nei Rosh Hashanah af al pi she'ein lahem kan tashmish. That apparently that's still called the airspace of the Rosh Hashanah, even though again the Rosh Hashanah does not utilize it. So the Gemara is suggesting from over here that you see that Rav does hold the common usage of airspace does restrict. That's why I can't throw from one home to another home across Rosh Hashanah. To which the Gemara says, no, that's not the reason. Amarle, lav miokimno. I told you already. We set up that case. The midli chad u'misis ichad. That in fact the homes are not on the same level. One home is higher, one home is lower. What's the concern? The zimnin dimig nadar v'nafil v'asil. We'll say, what's the concern? The concern is that since the homes are not on the same level, what's going to end up happening? You're going to end up throwing, and one of the parties is going to throw it too short, too high, too low. It's going to end up landing in Rosh Hashanah, and what's going to end up happening? You're going to end up carrying it inadvertently in Rosh Hashanah, but it has nothing to do with restriction of airspaces. So both say, so therefore, we halacha l'maisa have two important issues to resolve, right? Issue number one, I will say, is so what's the halacha concerning airspace, right? Does common usage of airspace restrict one upon the other? So I will say, so this, the Shulchan Aruch Paskins in Simin Shin Ayin Vav, Shin Ayin Vav Sif Beis. So Shulchan Aruch writes as follows. He says, Be'er. Shulchan Aruch quotes the case that we started out with, which we started today's daf with, which was the case of the shared water cistern. So Be'er shebe'emtza hashvil ben shnei kosli chatzeros Afa pishu muflegis mikol zetal tvachim. I'm just going to skip a little bit. So she'ein adam osir al chavero derech aver. So we'll say so just quickly. Halacha l'mais Shulchan Aruch paskins like Rav, namely shared airspace does not restrict one upon the other. You could see this is Shulchan Aruch Shin Ayin Vav Sif Beis. He quotes the case of the be'er of the shared water cistern. So halacha l'maisa we paskin like Rav. Shared airspace does not go ahead and restrict. Both say, what about the previous machlokes Rav and Shmuel about what happens if echa b'shulshul ve'echa b'zrika? So what happens in that case? So the Rambam there, Paskin, the Rambam says that halacha l'maisa haya kosel shebein shnei chaseros namach mechaz al yon v'gava mechaz shnei tzue echa adi shulshul b'nei chalutim shnei be'avi adi zrika shnei nasrabo. So interestingly enough, in that case, we paskin like Shmuel. We paskin like Rav in that case as well, that halacha l'maisa, when one party uses it through zrika and one party uses it through shilshul, that halacha l'maisa, they restrict upon each other. That halacha l'maisa, they are considered to have the same exact usage, and therefore as you should will say. Bottom line is, in both cases we paskin like Rav, that when it's echad b'zrika, the echad b'shilshul, they're both considered to be on the same playing field, and therefore they have joint usage and they asr upon each other. And we paskin like Rav that common usage of airspace does not restrict upon each other. Good. Both sides of the Mishnah. That's the halacha. Again, I didn't do those halachas. You'll look at the halacha Shinayin Vav Beis Arachayim, and in the Rambam it's Eruvin Perek Gimel Halacha Tes Zayin. Ayin Sham, you'll take a look there for more clarity. Says the Mishnah. We'll say, here we go. We'll say, beautiful, beautiful Mishnah. Beautiful. We'll listen to this. A person places his Eruv. We'll say, Beis Shar means a gatehouse. Achsadra means, again, we don't really translate it as like a portico. You can see, we'll say these examples are, this is picture 290. So the Achsadra, the little terraced area over the portico, right there, I guess you'd call it more, what do they call these, not a gazebo. People are building these things all the time now. What do they call it? Pergola. Thank you. A covered pergola. Covered pergola. So we'll say, so again, that's the Achsadra. Beis Shar is literally like a gatehouse. Again, we'll define all these a bit more. So if you go ahead and you put your Eruv in a Beis Shar and Achsadra, Umir Pesas, so we'll say Mir Pesas is like a terraceway, Eino Eruv. So we'll say, again, the common theme is none of these areas are considered to be a residence. So because you're not considered to be a resident, therefore, you cannot place your Eruv in these areas. V'hadar sham, but ultimately, again, if someone lives actually in one of these areas, Eino Oser love. So we'll say, somebody actually living in one of these areas that does not restrict on the rest of the Bnei HaChatzer, because Lamaisa is not considered to be a real domicile. However, Beis HaTeven, Beis HaBakar, Beis HaEtzim, but halacha l'maisa again, if you have a storehouse for straw, a storehouse for cattle, or a storehouse for wood, Beis HaOtzros, or again, a storehouse, again, for white, if we're going to say Beis HaOtzro can mean a storage area for anything, then what? Harei ze Eruv. Ultimately, again, this is considered to be a bona fide Eruv. So we'll say, so if you were to go ahead and place your Eruv in one of these other areas, then halacha l'maisa, the placement of the Eruv is proper. So we'll say, what's the logic? Again, it's just a din in what is a domicile. What is a domicile? So interestingly enough, as much as the Achsadra, the Beis Shar, the Mir Pesas, these are not considered to be places where people live, and because of that, you cannot place your Eruv there. However, again, Beis HaTeven, Beis HaBakar, Beis HaEtzim, Beis HaOtzros, this is all permitted. So the Gemara says, if you place your Eruv there, ultimately, again, it works. It works. And similarly, again, if somebody lives in one of these areas, then ultimately, again, they must join in the Eruv as well. Rabbi Huda says, so this is incredible. I will say this is a situation where what happens if halacha l'maisa, someone owns the entire chutzner, and he leases out the area to everyone else. So I own the chutzner, I own the structures in the chutzner, I lease out my area. And I have tfisas yad. Also, we'll define what this means, but on a basic level, tfisas yad means that I store my stuff in some of these leased out areas. Because I store my things in these rented out, leased out areas, halacha l'maisa, I am considered to be a resident there, and therefore it's considered to be as if the entire chutzner is the domicile of one person. In which case, in halacha l'maisa, of course, an eruv would not be necessary. So we'll define that. So we'll say, Bottom line, what comes out from the Mishnah is as follows. For Eruv Chaseros purposes, you can only place your Eruv in a place that is considered to be a residence. The Eruv must be placed in a place, and only if someone lives in a place that is considered a residence, do they impact or do they have to participate in the Eruv. But if somebody, for argument's sake, lives in a place that's not considered to be a residence, for example, I'm about to say, I decide the weather is beautiful outside, I want to live in the covered pergola. That's where I want to live. Allah said that's not a residence. So if someone lives in the covered pergola, they need not participate in the Eruv, for they are not considered to be a resident. Similarly, you cannot place the Eruv food in that covered pergola as well. I'm using good. It says the Gemara, I'm going to read the Shmuel Bar Shilas. Kamakum sh'amru hadar sham eino oser. So I say anytime in the Mishnah, anytime we say that if you live in a particular place, you do not aser, you do not impact the other residents of the Chatzar vis-a-vis Eruv. Hanosin es Eruvo eino Eruv. If you were to place your Eruv in that place, it's not a proper placement. So again, the Gemara is just talking about a very simple relationship. Any time where if you live in a particular place in the Chatzar, your residence is not called a residence, so too again, the Eruv could not be placed in that area. So we'll say, so a simple example, just because I'm into the pergolas, right? So we'll say, so just like we said in the Mishnah, that a covered pergola does not count as a residence. So if someone lives in a covered pergola, they are not considered to be a residence in that they do not have to participate in the Eruv. So too, therefore, the Eruv cannot be stored there for the Chatzar. To which the Gemara says, Chutz mi beis shar diyachid, with the exception of a gatehouse of a chatzar in which a single person lives. We'll discuss the parameters of that case. V'chol makom shamru chachamim ein manichin bo eruv. But we'll say any place that the chacham say you can't place an eruv, manichin bo shituf. You can go ahead and place a shituf muvos. Chutz me'aver mavui, with the exception ultimately again of the airspace in the mavui. You can't place a shituf in the airspace of the mavui itself. To which the Gemara says, okay, my kamashal, I don't say, why do the Gemara just have to say that? We learned that from the Mishnah. Tanina, hanosin es eruv beis sharach sadron presses eno eruv. So we learned that if you place your eruv in the gatehouse or in the pergola or in the mirpeses, it's not an eruv. Eruv hu delahavi, sheet of havi. It's not an eruv, but you can place your sheet of mavos there. To which the Gemara says, you're right. Beis sha'ar diyachid va'avir demavui itzrichale delotnan. We only wanted to add in the case of the gatehouse of a privately owned chatzar, in which case can be used, and the airspace of a mavui, which cannot be used for the shitov. That's what we needed to mention because it was not mentioned in the Mishnah. So we'll stop over here for today, but just understand we're stopping again with a very simple relationship. In the chatzar itself, only a place that is deemed a domicile has to participate in the Eruv, that's A, and only a place that's deemed a domicile is a place in which the Eruv can be placed. But if an area is not deemed a domicile, even if someone lives there, they do not have to participate in the Eruv, and even if someone lives there, the Eruv itself cannot be stored there. All right, we'll continue Meretz Hashem with this tomorrow. Shkoyach.